Bonjour, French students. Welcome to the final week before we take our Chapter 1 exam, le Chapitre 1. And this series of topics that you see here in the next few slides, it looks like a lot of stuff. So we see at the top here it says le genre. We've seen this word in English before. We use that to talk about different types of music or different types of movies, right? And basically it has the same meaning in French. It's just like a category. And we often translate this as gender when we're talking about nouns in French, so a masculine noun or a feminine noun. We use the terms masculine and feminine, but it really has nothing to do with biological sex. It's just categorizing. Some nouns have le at the beginning, some nouns have la at the beginning, and it's really just a way of grouping them. It's a feature of French and a lot of other languages. It doesn't happen to be a feature of English. But French calls this le genre, and it just means categorizing nouns, what we would know as gender. The second topic that you see here is l'article indéfini, and that just means indefinite article. In English, we know these as the words a or an, or a or an, depending on how you're pronouncing it. And indefinite articles are just little words that come before nouns, and if they're indefinite, they happen to be non-specific things. So if I say, I have a book, I have one book out of many possible books. I'm not referring to a specific book. If I say I have the book, it means one specific book. I'm definitely narrowing that down to a specific one. So in this lesson, we'll be learning about the indefinite article in French, things that are pretty general. They're not really specific items. And lastly, we'll learn about l'expression il y a. So, il y a, they're like three separate words. Il is like he, y is like there, and then a is like kind of like two. When you put them all together, it's just basically means there is or there are. So whatever comes after it, if you say il y a des livres, so there are some books, for example. Okay, so as we see here, to say there is or there are in French, you'll be using the expression il y a, and it will be followed by the indefinite article, and that can come in these three forms: un, une, or des. So un and une just mean a or an in English, except that un is what goes with a masculine noun, and une goes with a feminine noun. Des just means some, so it's like a group of indefinite things. So if you want to say there isn't or there aren't, if I want to make this expression negative, then I'm going to say il n'y a pas de. Okay, so I'm adding the ne and the pas. Ne, we drop the e before e, spelled with a y, because the vowel mixed together with e right after it, we don't need to have all those vowels, so that it forms a contraction. And then instead of saying il n'y a pas un, or il n'y a pas une, or il n'y a pas des, none of that would be correct. All of that collapses down to just simply de. And we'll see that in some example sentences in just a few moments. So as we've already talked about, all nouns in French have a gender, masculine or feminine, and it has nothing to do with male or female in the biological sense. It's just categorizing nouns. Only people would have that distinction of male or female. And you really can't guess which nouns are masculine or feminine in French. You just have to learn it. If you were to compare some nouns that are masculine, let's say in French, they might be feminine in Spanish, for example. Spanish has the same breakdown of masculine and feminine. There's just no way to predict that. In Spanish, it's a bit easier because some nouns end in o or a, and you can determine it from that. French is not always as clear. So it's better to just, learn the gender of a noun when you learn the noun. And you can learn it along with its article, like un or une. All right, so moving on. All right, so we've already learned a little bit about these indefinite articles. So the short word un or une, both of them refer to a or an. So un goes along with a masculine noun, une goes along with a feminine noun. And as I mentioned before, des just means some. So it's kind of an indefinite quantity of a plural group of things. Okay, so if we look at, let's say, some masculine and feminine nouns right here, we have un film, so that has un before it. It's a masculine noun. And very often words that are of foreign origin, and this would be foreign origin as in foreign to the French language, these will often be masculine nouns. So film, I believe, probably comes from English. So this word has a masculine indefinite article before it. Une bibliothèque. Okay, so the feminine form une comes right before bibliothèque. And then in the plural form, notice that we have des for both of them. So un film becomes des films. So j'ai vu des films. I saw some films. Or je suis allé, or j'ai vu des bibliothèques. I saw some libraries. Okay, so it just simply means some, an indefinite quantity. And as we already know, to make a noun plural, you just add an S to the end of it, and it's usually silent, as we could see with film and bibliothèque. There are certain nouns where you're going to change the ending, so any nouns that end in EAU, like bureau, which would be office or desk, you're just going to change that to adding an X, and it's going to be pronounced exactly the same. Okay. So now what happens when you want to take a sentence that has il y a and you want to make it negative? So we can say il y a un stade, okay, there is a stadium, but now I want to say there is not a stadium. So notice that un becomes de when it's in the negative. So il n'y a pas de stade. However, when people are speaking really quickly, they don't really say all of those words separately. They don't say il n'y a pas de stade. It would sound really mechanical. So pas de becomes pad. It becomes almost like one word. So il n'y a pas de stade. Il n'y a pas de stade, if you wanted to say it really quickly. And as I've mentioned in other videos, if you want to be able to understand people well when they speak rapid French or in any language that you happen to be studying, it's good to know the patterns of how people actually speak, not how a dialogue might present it in a textbook. So, il y a un stade, il n'y a pas de stade. Il y a une bibliothèque, il n'y a pas de bibliothèque. Or prenez des notes, or take some notes. Even des becomes de. Ne prenez pas de notes. So do not take any notes. So notice this one happens to be a command. Prenez des notes. Take some notes. And when we make a command negative, you're just putting ne and pas before and after it. Ne prenez pas de notes. Il y a des étudiants dans la classe. And notice the liaison entre, between des and étudiants. Des étudiants dans la classe. So there are some students in the class. And that becomes il n'y a pas d'étudiants dans la classe. So des becomes de, and it gets linked up with étudiant like a contraction. So, il n'y a pas d'étudiants dans la classe. Okay, but if we happen to be using this form of être with ce, like c'est un bon restaurant. Okay, so if I say c'est un bon restaurant, that's this, it is a good restaurant. When I'm using that form, like it is rather than there is or there are, then I don't need to use de in place of un. Oh, I would say ce n'est pas un bon restaurant. And often when people speak very quickly in French, instead of saying ce n'est pas, they might just shorten that down to c'est pas. The ne kind of gets dropped in quick speech. C'est pas un bon restaurant. Ce n'est pas becomes c'est pas. So we do this in all languages. All right. So one last point to make about this topic. And so un, une, and des, as we've already seen with the previous slide, in these expressions, it also changes to de after expressions of quantity. So if I'm using expressions of quantity like assez, beaucoup, and combien, assez means enough, beaucoup means a lot, and combien is how much. Il y a combien de cinéma? So I wouldn't say il y a combien de cinéma. It's il y a combien de cinéma? How many cinemas or how many movie theaters are there? Il y a assez de parking. Okay, this of course is a very recognizable word that's been borrowed into French from English. There actually is a French word for parking, and I think nobody uses it. It's like stationnement, which means almost like stationed, to be stationed somewhere. But that word has kind of fallen out of favor over the years, and instead French has borrowed this word parking into its language. And this happens all the time. We have borrowed all kinds of words into French or into English from other languages too. So, il y a assez de parking. Okay, so there is enough parking. And it's kind of funny to see an S on the end of parking when we would never do that in English, right? And finally, il y a beaucoup d'arbres. So we wouldn't say il y a beaucoup des arbres. That wouldn't sound correct. Il y a beaucoup d'arbres. So there are a lot of trees. Okay, so with il y a, I think the most important thing to remember is that if you are using it in the positive form, like there is, there are, it's pretty easy. Il y a une chaise, there is a chair. Il y a des chaises, there are some chairs. Okay. If I'm making it negative, however, as we saw in slide 3 right here, that's where you have to think about how to transform it. So, il y a un stade, as you might remember, becomes il n'y a pas de stade. Il y a une bibliothèque becomes il n'y a pas de bibliothèque. Okay? So it's just important to remember the relationship between il y a and the indefinite article and how that gets transformed from the positive form to the negative form. Okay, so that's all for this topic, and you can look forward to 2 more videos this week by Wednesday at the latest. That way you have between Wednesday and Sunday to do your final studying for Chapter 1. And please don't hesitate to ask questions if you're feeling confused about anything, especially well in advance of due dates. That way I can help you and make suggestions for you and try to make the process easier. So have a great night.